but who better than me?
Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Got another round of those end of year awards, and this one's probably the most easiest one thus far to give out. So we're doing Trainer of the Year. I don't even need to go through the list. The Trainer of the Year for 2022 is Derek James. I don't think there's anyone that's really going to argue that point. He's pretty much had a stellar year thus far. You know, he took Jamel Charlo to the undisputed crown at super welterweight or light middle, depending on how you want to say it. He got Errol Spence Jr. to unify with Yordenis Ugas. You know, he owns now 3/4 of the welterweight division. He also had a career best performance from Frank Martin against Michelle Rivera, sorry. Just recent, was that last week before? It was last week. So other than that, obviously he's got other talents and stuff that's in the gyms with him. He seems to be on a roll. So he is the Trainer of the Year as far as I'm concerned, and I think most other people would agree with that. So what I wanted to do with this video is kind of talk about some of the other people that excelled a little bit. Normally I do I'll sort of cut it into segments and sections, but that won't be necessary for this one because it's not going to really be that structured. But I think that the next person who should be considered, if not the trainer, maybe say that the runner-up or just the best of the rest, so to speak. And that's got to go for me to Robert Garcia. Now, Robert is very well schooled. Most people will know he is the older brother of Mikey Garcia. This year, he has had a pretty stellar run overall. You know, he's got Jesse Bam Rodriguez to 3 fights. He was supposed to fight a 4th time in December, but the body wasn't quite feeling up to it, so they decided to forego that and move it to the first quarter of 2023. But he's had 3 fights with Bam, 3 victories, where Bam moved up 2 weight divisions from his previous weight and won a world title in his very first fight after moving up. Defended it with an excellent career best performance stoppage victory against Sarisfiket Sorongvisai, who was one of the most sort of notorious and avoided guys within that super flyweight division. You know, only really the sort of the 4 kings, so quote unquote, ever decided to take him on. He's also got Joshua Franco fighting on New Year's Eve in Japan against Kazuto Ioka. Now, if Joshua Franco wins that fight, because it is a unification between the WBA and the WBO belts, there is definitely a chance that he might then be able to pip Derek James to that Trainer of the Year. So there is every single chance that I may have to do an amendment video or put a post in the community poll switching my decision. Not only has he had that work, he still works with Jose Ramirez, who I believe had a fairly decent victory earlier on this year. Couple others, I know he was with Victor Ortiz before Ortiz decided to leave the gym. I'm not sure when exactly that was, but he's been putting in some pretty decent performances this year also. And not to mention, he did lead Anthony Joshua into a somewhat better performance against Alexander Usyk in their rematch. Now, yes, even though you could say that Anthony Joshua didn't actually win any more rounds than he did in that first fight, he did perform a lot better throughout, especially up until sort of round 9. Then obviously rounds 10, 11 and 12, Usyk done what Usyk does, and he just killed and crushed any hopes that Joshua had of maintaining victory. But Joshua was doing some markedly better work than what he was doing in the first fight, and that was down partially to the tuition of Robert Garcia. So I definitely think he should be in this list for, sort of for his work. Next, who I think deserves a mention this year, who's I think has had quite a good one, is Shane McGuigan. Now, Shane is very much he's almost like a Mr. Steady. Like he's always like there or thereabouts when it comes to top trainers and, you know, sort of getting the best out of his fighters. Even though the performance itself wasn't amazing, he led Lawrence Okolie to a defense of his WBO title against Michelle Cislak in February at the O2. I remember that because I was there. He had, if I remember correctly, I think Ellie Scottney was also on that card. I think she's had 3 fights this year, I believe, and she has pretty much dominated her opponents nigh on throughout every round that she's been fighting. Daniel Dubois, he got Daniel Dubois to the WBA regular title at heavyweight, and he even talked Daniel through a crisis moment in the fight he had with Kevin Lorena a couple weeks ago. You know, talked him through what to do and how to navigate that fight, and Daniel ended up getting a 3rd round stoppage. He also had Chris Billum-Smith in what was arguably a fight of the year contender against Isaac Chamberlain earlier on this year in Bournemouth. Oversaw that performance, not to mention the Tommy McCarthy rematch, which I believe was still this year at the start of it. Now I could be totally wrong, I haven't checked the date, but he was instrumental in that performance also. Not to mention, you know, Chris Billum-Smith getting one of the knockouts of the year, arguably, against Arman Jojag just a week ago now. So yeah, I mean, there's more people in the stable. Adam Azim is also one of his charges, who is running roughshod through through all of his fights at the moment. So yeah, Shane McGuigan is definitely another top contender to maybe be in that list. Another name I kind of want to highlight is Ismael Salas. Now, he wasn't that successful with Dennis Ugas against Errol Spence Jr. Derek James got the best of that, but in that particular fight, Ismael Salas actually had Dennis Ugas doing some good work throughout the first half of it, and every time that he hit Errol Spence, being the fact he's not even the hugest of punchers, you can kind of see that Errol Spence was not comfortable sort of taking a lot of those shots, even to a point where he probably wobbled Errol Spence Jr. the worst he's been wobbled in his professional career. You know, knocking his gum shield out, knocking him against the ropes, folded him over to the body a couple of times. But if you want to look at sort of some of his more sort of standout victories, he had Joe Joyce go into probably what was a career best performance against Joseph Parker. The only other one you might want to put into that would be the Daniel Dubois fight, but since Parker was fighting at a much higher level, I think it's a lot more it's a lot fairer to maybe say that is you know, sort of his career defining fight and his career defining performance. And it ended up with an 11th round knockout of Joseph Parker, which no one has ever done before. No one's ever knocked him out. This was the first time. Even though to Joseph Parker's credit, he did get up and he did actually beat the count of 10, but the referee just felt he had seen enough and decided to wave it off. But yeah, so that is the number 3 that I had in mind. And there was another one that I was thinking of, but Mark Ramsey. How could I forget Mark Ramsey? You know, the trainer of Arslanbek Makhmudov, who seems to, you know, be sort of thriving under him, had a bit of a lackluster-ish type performance against Carlos Takam, but he's still a very serviceable operator and he will give anyone a hard night's work. But he was back to his destructive best against Michael Valish a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure if Mark also trains Mary Spencer, but if he does, I mean, she had 6 fights this year. She won 5 and lost 1. So you got to kind of look at that in the credentials as well. Also, he is the trainer of the reigning unified light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev, who had maybe not a career best performance, but you know, he dispatched of another legitimate world champion in Joe Smith Jr. inside of, what was it, 2 rounds, which is something that has, you know, Joe Smith Jr. had never even been off his feet prior to that, and Artur Beterbiev dropped him 3 times within the first 2 rounds. So yeah, those are some of the fighters that I think deserved a bit of a mention outside of your trainer of the year. And as I said, you know, there's every chance that Robert Garcia could possibly pip it if he gets another unified world champion in stable at the end of the year. But yeah, no discussion, no quarrels and quibbles about it. It's definitely, at this moment in time, Derek James, trainer of the year for 2022.